Dalahan, Danayash, Shakushi Rudy Lopez, Shusha Nila for tuning in. In today's video, we'll be teaching you guys how to use a bead loom. We broke this video into 3 sections to make it easy. We'll put the links in the description. Alright, so before we get started, I want to go over a few things we're going to need so you can get all those collected before you start, because you don't want to get into the middle of a project and not have everything you need. So most importantly, you should probably lay your design out before you get started and make your life a lot easier. So I use graph paper. The smaller the graph paper, the easier it's going to be to follow your design. Moving on, we're going to go through, and I like to use this sectional plate because it kind of keeps everything separated for you, and different colors and different needles and strings and everything you're going to need. Now as for beads, we're going to use a size between, I'd say, 8 and 10. And that varies in different sizes, but for the most part, especially with the detailed work, it's going to work out a lot better if you use the smaller beads. Now here's the different few ideas and different sizes and colors I like to use, but basically about this size, if that makes sense, and you can see it, about between 8 and 10 is perfect for looming. You can loom with bigger sizes, but you're only going to get you so far. Now moving on to the string, you're going to want to use more of a sewing string is fine, and most looming kits come with the string you need. I would veer away from cotton and other things that like to fray, because it's going to be really hard to get that to stay where you need it to be and to re-thread your needles when it frays every time. And you'll be doing a lot of cutting and a lot of re-eyeing your needle, and that's no fun. Just makes your life a lot easier if you use the right string, or at least a string that's more solid. That makes sense. Moving on to needles. So for sewing your loom, your beadwork, for sewing your beadwork down, I'd use a smaller, thicker needle. I know it's hard to see, but this is a lot smaller but thicker than the actual beading loom. So this right here is the looming needle. So it's thinner, it's longer, has a smaller eye, which you need to have a smaller eye to be able to fit through the holes in all the beads. Now this one right here, it's thicker and smaller, and you're never gonna fit that eye through your beads. So you wanna make sure that you have 2 different types, because this is the one you're gonna sew your backing to your leather onto your beadwork, but you're not gonna be able to use this one for your beadwork. And this one is just for your looming. But to remember, these ones are very thin and they get bent really easy, and once they get bent too hard, it's gonna be really hard. So you're gonna have to be fragile with your needles and kind of take care of your tools. Take care of anything that you have a passion about. You're gonna wanna take care of your tools and take care of your beads and keep them in a nice place, and just every time you approach beading in general, you wanna have good energy. You wanna stay away from beading when you're mad or you're sad or you're angry. You wanna make sure that you're putting good energy out there, and so that every time you bead yourself, you're associating beading with good intentions and good thoughts and love. And I think that's important, especially for our own culture in general. For being Native in general, I think that it's important for us to remember why we're doing this and remember who we're doing it for, and not just for ourselves, but for our community, our children, our mothers, our grandparents. So let's keep that in mind. And all right, let's get started. So first, I'll be going over the process of the sections. So we got the empty loom here, which I'll be showing you how to string up in a minute. And then we got the bead layout, which you got designs and all your line work. And then we got the finished product of actually putting it on leather, or however you decide to use it. Okay, so first we're gonna start off with the stringing of the loom. Now right here, we got just some regular string that come with most loom kits. I prefer to use more of a nylon or anything besides cotton, because it likes to fray. But here we go. So I like to start off and tie kind of a half hitch knot, just to kind of get it to stay where you're going to tie it to. Now it doesn't need to be tight, it just needs to stay there for the meantime. Now I take this, and basically you're gonna eye it off to the next little post out here. So it's not so important. It has to be perfect. As long as it looks to the eye, it's straight enough. And in between every coil is gonna be a bead. So you want to eye it out and get it directly centered as possible. So I go through, and in between every coil, I'll go back through and I'll lay it right down in there. And I go towards the bottom and I'll wrap it around the bottom post and come back around and do it again. Now me personally, I like to go around one side and come back up and go to the other side, and it kind of keeps your wrap symmetric, but it's not mandatory. Now something to keep in mind is that for every bead you're going to use, you're going to need a string on both sides. So for my design over here, I use 14 beads, so I need 15 lines. You're always going to have one extra line in bead to make sure you have a line on both sides. So we'll be doing that here. Now it's really a patient process, so take your time, and it's really important to let the loom kind of make the tension for you. So just lay it on there and go smooth and put it back. But don't pull too tight, otherwise you'll be pulling tension off and it'll be tighter in some places and not the others. So just kind of smoothly lay it down and wrap it around and hook it, and then go back up the other side and just kind of go slow and try to have just a soft, smooth motion with it, and things always go a lot easier than trying to rush things. And so if you adjust the tension, and if say for some reason it did get loose or too tight, you unscrew these little bolts right here. I'll show you and see how it's kind of loose a little bit, and that's going to be a problem that a lot of people have. So loosen them up a little bit and then pull it towards you, and the tension will come off, and then tighten them back up. And so you'll turn this little loom and the tension will turn back up with it. See, now I'm turning it. Takes a little adjusting. And go back over, and then you turn it towards you. You can do the same thing on the other side, but I would suggest to do that on both sides slowly, because if you pull too hard, you're going to set it off on every side, and you're going to be chasing that the entire time. So just do a little bit at a time, and just try to keep the same tension, and you shouldn't have too many problems. And I like to use something with a pointy edge so I can count the lines. Remember, we're always going to use one more line than how many beads we have on our loom. So I got 12 lines, so I need 3 more. And in between every one of these lines is going to be a bead. And that's going to be directly correlate with the graph paper and the design that you laid out. I think that's 15. Let me count it again. That's 15. Now I like to give myself a little bit of string. When you're done laying your string out, you can cut that out of the way. Now this is the way I like to do it. And the same thing with beading is in most things, is everybody has their own way to do it. It comes to specific tribes, specific families, specific people. It's really about how it works for you. So I don't want to discourage anybody when they're not doing it exactly like the way I'm doing it, when how I've learned, especially with beading, is it's all about how you feel comfortable doing it. So after you're all done and you lay your strings out, I like to take the end of my string and I take it on the bottom and then back through and make the same little loop, and it'll kind of clinch and tighten everything down to each other. And just for safety, I like to do it again. And like I said, none of this is mandatory. If it feels tight enough for you, it might be, but a little extra one is not going to hurt nothing. And then from there, you can cut it off. I always leave a little tail, and you can tie it to the next one if you want to. And then we'll use this piece right here to thread our needle to use for our first section of our loom. I already had one prepared. but this is what I usually use to start off with. So this right here, I'm right-handed, and that's going to apply to people who are left-handed, is how you're going to start your looming, whatever's more comfortable to you. But I'm going to start off, and I'm going to go through the very first, in between the first and the second line on the right side, and just tie a simple knot. Doesn't have to be tight, because eventually the string is going to be wove back and forth and it's not going to see it anyway. It's just something to keep it there until you get your first line in there. Okay, so we're going to use a piece of graph paper to plan out our design. Now this is the design on the loom, but to start it off, we're going to need to start with the actual graph paper. So remember that if you're going to use 14 rows, or however many you decide to use, that we need to have one extra line. So in this case scenario, we're going to start off with the one on the left, and you're going to start off and you're going to see that there's one orange bead, about 5 blue, 2 orange, 5 blue, 1 orange. And that translates into these beads. So every graph square is going to be a bead. And so if you follow this down, you don't necessarily need it to look pretty. You don't need it to actually color coordinate with the actual colors you're using. And you don't need to lay out the full design. You really only need about 2 or 3, even 1 if the design's specific enough, and you'll be able to follow that along. So for example, with this one right here, after you do the first one, you can just simply go back and start off in the very beginning of that design and keep following that through. So you really only need this to start off. And after you get your piece of your design off, if it's symmetric, you can follow that all the way through. But another example is this design is not symmetric. So you would have to make sure that you are following specifically every time, and you're going to have to make sure that you orientate the left hand and the right hand side to make sure that you're going to lay out the design right, because it's not the same on both sides. All right, so before we actually lay out our beads, I just wanted to note the hardest part of looming is actually the first line. After you get the first line down and the second line down, the lines will tighten up together and they'll fit your beads a little better and everything will go a little smoother. So you're gonna have to really be just careful and be patient, and once you get that down, it'll get much easier, I promise you. You wanna give yourself enough string that you can work your way up, because you're gonna go in and out, right through left, over and over until you feel like your design's done. So give yourself enough that you can go back and forth without having to change your string 8 times, but also don't give yourself too much to where it's gonna get caught up on everything, kind of like I'm doing right here. So for our next video, stay tuned, and I'm going to move on to the second part of our video about looming the beads up and actually stringing the beads along. So you can line them up and make your design actually play out on the beads. Shushanila for watching our video. Please stay tuned for our next video where I'll be going over how to string up your beads. We would love to see what you came up with, so take a picture and use our hashtag followwatalawa on Facebook so we can check it out. Shushanila.